Which one do you think is done in acrylic and which one is done in oils? My name is Carla Grace. I am a full-time wildlife artist and I have been teaching my process for the past 6 or 7 years. I've moved on to creating a process for both acrylic and oil painting. Now I'm teaching this process on my platform, which you can find in the description below. And of course, you are welcome to follow along for further tips and tricks. If you would like to dive deeper, please feel free to follow that link and see what I have in store on my platform. This one is an oil painting and this one is an acrylic painting. I did these particular pieces as tutorials for my tutorial platform for beginners. So I'm going to get into the differences in my process and explain the tutorial basically for you so that you can make a decision for yourself whether or not you want to work in acrylic or oils. I did each one in 6.5 hours, I think it was roughly. The horse painting I did across 2 days. So I allowed my blocking in layer to dry and then I came in with a detail layer on the next day. The acrylic one I did in 1 whole day. So the whole purpose for doing these particular tutorials was to show how to create the same painting with each medium in the same time frame. Now, yes, of course, with oil paintings, this is an oversimplified approach. It's for beginners. It reduces the confusion when it comes to medium, layering, and a whole bunch of other things. The fat over lean process. I explain it, but I don't focus on it in the tutorial. I focus on the technique and the process that I use to create a realistic painting in a very short amount of time. I simplify the process so that it makes it achievable and a straightforward approach so that artists who are wanting to just start and get off that starting block and really make something that they're proud of can achieve that through this tutorial. With the acrylic painting, I have broken down my particular way of working with detail, layers, and blending into 7 really straightforward layers or applications of paint across the whole portrait. I don't work in specific focal zones. I work across the whole piece and this helps to work efficiently, and it also helps at the end when it comes to assessing whether or not the piece is done. So, how to paint a horse portrait with oils and acrylic. Let's get into it. I started the whole process off by toning the canvases with burnt umber. Burnt umber for this particular piece was really good in creating a really dark foundation. So I start with my darker areas and my shadows to create form, structure, and basically give me really good anchor points to work with as I develop the portrait. Important here, because of the speed that I was working with on the oil painting, I used acrylic paint as the base. So you obviously don't have to do that if you're using oils, but if you want to speed up the process, do your toning in acrylic and the dark, really pinpoint, accurate areas that need that really dark tone and the contrast in there, use acrylic for that. Then I really began with my blocking in layer. Now I tend to work with a little bit more detail than necessary with the blocking in with the oil painting because honestly, every detail shows through when you're working this quickly and in such few applications over time. So it's very much a paint by numbers kind of situation. I create color strings on my palette as I go and value scales. So I'm working with my color in terms of light and dark. And as I progress through the scales and the contrast, I will slowly adapt those according to some really basic color theory, which I also teach in my tutorial platform. It really helps to simplify the whole process. So with the oil painting, I block in all the kind of mid-range colors. I don't go super, super dark too early on, and I don't go super, super light too early on. I first create that base of mid-range colors, which then give me a great foundation to work with. So I'm focusing on the weight of the pigments, how they blend, and how they kind of create a transition in the areas that go from light to dark, so that allow me to really create good contrast and that really rounded full muscle shape to the horse. So that becomes a really important part to these layers as well and a good focus of the tutorial. So it gives you a good foundation on how to use your paints properly in the layering process. It simplifies that process completely. In the acrylic painting, I most notably move quite quickly through this blocking in initial base layer. And I'm focusing really on those darker tones, like quite a lot darker than how I worked with the oil paint. Not super dark in terms of the pure black, more just a mid-range dark tone. That's because I'm creating a darker shadow foundation for me to add the lighter detail layers to come. So once I've applied the paint across the whole painting and created that real base blocking in kind of tone, I'll then come in with my background, because once I've added these foundational tones, I want to avoid having to repaint the fine edges, and it makes it much more simple going forward. I then focused on the eye in the acrylic painting very early on, because the eye for me is usually the focal point, and getting that right helps to really set the tone for the whole painting. And there's the most key thing to notice here is the change in the tones on both the oil and the acrylic painting around the fur of the eye and the mane. And that's mostly because the fur around the eye is like this very soft, velvety kind of black tone, as well as the mane. That's also kind of black. So the color and the way that light reflects on that color is different to how the color and light reflect on the brown fur. In the oil painting, I think I spent a bigger chunk of time in the first half. So it was about 3.5 to 4 hours in this initial blocking in layer. I didn't focus on too much detail until the next day, when I allowed that drying time to come in, which allowed me to glaze some areas and do some subtle changes. But in this initial blocking in layer, I actually add quite a lot of detail, which makes it easier to apply the following layers and really refine that detail. So it's all blended in. It becomes a very soft kind of finish between the areas of contrast. So wet on wet was very simple, straightforward to start with, and then we allowed it to dry. So that is something that was really important in this tutorial, and as a beginner, being able to walk away from the painting and leave it at one stage so that you can come back in and bring in more detail is important to help you avoiding muddying your colors. And I know that when you're a beginner, these processes will take a bit longer, so there will be dry time. You don't have to sit there and paint this entire piece in one go. It's taken me over a decade to get to the point where I'm able to create something like this in one sitting. So when you do this, know that dry time is really important, and it helps a lot. So when it comes to adding the next layer of paint, I talk about how to make this easier to do, and also how to create that wet on wet effect and reduce that surface tension so that you're able to create really smooth lines and create some beautiful effects with your brush. On the acrylic painting, you'll notice that it gets darker. This is when I start using glazes to create my blends, and is the key difference in painting with oils, where we blend everything as we go, and acrylic, where we layer the paint in order to create our blended colors. So I focus on my glazes, and I teach us how we can use glazes to adjust our mixes and our colors on the painting, and why it really doesn't matter if your paint dries slightly different to how you mixed it. The whole process is focused on slight adjustments at each stage, and so you really don't have to worry about that. It's not an issue with the way that I work with acrylic. I barely even notice it, because every time I adjust my paint mix, it's based on how it's turned out on the painting itself. Nothing is based on how it looks on the palette. It all is based on how it dries and looks on the painting. So that's the biggest difference. Oils, you can judge straight away. Acrylic, you judge as you go, and you adapt and refine and perfect with time. It becomes quite clear in the oil painting tutorial when I am now working with a dry, fresh surface. The brushwork is much more clear. The lines I make are very stark, and you can tell that they're quite spread out. I'm not focusing on refined detail or careful manipulation or anything like that. It is solely focused on layers and creating a volume of texture that then work together to create the detail. So I'm avoiding hyper detail or over perfectionism. I want beginners to learn to work with the paint with the nature of the paint still intact. I don't want it to be a robotic reproduction of the reference photo. I want the artist to be able to let the paint still maintain its painterly properties and to enjoy the process as well. It is easier to create sharper details with the acrylic in this particular situation, simply because of how fast it dries. Even though both paintings took the same amount of time, I would probably need a lot more time with the oil painting to create the same level of detail and crispness that I have in my acrylic painting. So it gets to the end of the painting, and it happens rather quickly on both sides. The further we get along in the process, so the blocking in takes probably the biggest amount of time, and then the next detail layer, that's also a huge chunk. And then you move on in the layers and they get smaller and smaller, and your focus becomes more detail orientated and it doesn't take up as much time. So the finish kind of like comes upon you and you think, oh, we're pretty close to the end. So then I teach how to finish the painting and walk away, even when there are areas that you know you can spend more time on. I think it's impossible to truly finish a painting and be completely satisfied that there's nothing else that you can do. So finding the balance between doing a painting that has more than enough detail and that looks realistic and is beautiful and really save yourself the extra hours that no one is actually really going to notice. That's what these are about. It's painting across the whole piece rather than micromanaging each section that you create. When you're working across the whole thing and you're looking at it as a whole piece, you're able to really see it with fresh eyes each time you come to paint. If you would like to check out these tutorials, get the color mixes, the step-by-step approach, then head over to my tutorial platform where you can watch the whole thing, either as part of the subscription or as an individual tutorial. So if you would like to see more from me, then please hit share and comment, etc. You know what to do. I guess I will see you in the next video.